Well, now that we're streaming, we should probably get started. That's good. He's coming back, right? Excellent. Oh, there you go. Nice. So to settle into a comfortable, sustainable posture, whichever way you do it, is good. To feel solidly planted so that either your knees or your calves or your feet are planted where they are and feel like they've got a pretty even amount of weight on them, that your sit bones are planted on whatever you're sitting on and feel like they're taking, probably the most of your weight, but it should still kind of feel like a tripod in some ways, like there's more than one thing holding you up or connecting you to the earth. And then it can help to explore and adjust the twist of your upper body with respect to your hips. It's more of a thing if you're sitting in some sort of cross-legged posture, but even in sitting in seiza or sitting in a chair, it's possible to sit in a way that's slightly twisted, and over time that can become uncomfortable. And man, my entire career as an engineer, I was sitting in a some sort of twisted mode and in chairs looking at screens, and man, did it ruin my life, basically. So yeah, it's good to if you to explore the twist. You see, twist a little to the right, twist a little to the left, and see what feels like the middle, and see what feels like it's unloading, either unloading or equally loading sort of both of your psoas muscles and your upper quads, basically. And similarly with the muscles in your lower abdomen and your lower back, to see if you can find a sort of a center point, both in the uprightness of the body, but also in the tilt of your pelvis, that makes those muscles feel relaxed and lightly engaged. And then arrange for a slight lift in your chest, very, very subtle, just so that the muscles in your upper back and the sort of skin in your upper back can feel like it's sliding down your back. And so that there's a lot of air and space for the air in your lungs and in your diaphragm. And you can test that by just allowing a really deep breath to come in through your nose and fill your abdominal cavity all the way down to the bottom. And then put a little tension in your lower abdominal muscles and maybe the muscles of your pelvic floor, and then let that breath fall out of your body. Notice what happens when you do that. it sort of pulls your posture into some kind of alignment. Just the act of breathing out helps your head float back and up, helps your face fall into a vertical plane with your ears in line with your shoulders and your nose in line with your navel. And any hand position that's comfortable is good, but if you want to do the one that's mostly recommended for Zazen in the Soto school, it's this one where you put your left palm on top of your right palm, bend your hands around so your thumbs are touching lightly. You make a big circle with your hands, basically, and place that right here, right up against your lower abdomen, and focusing on, in some ways, on the place that you breathe from. Open your eyes. Let your gaze be soft and wide, so it takes in pretty much the whole room. All the way out to the periphery, without looking at it, just seeing it, just bringing it in. Maybe a few more concerted breaths with a little bit of emphasis on the out breath and a little bit of tension in your pelvic floor and your lower abdominal muscles when you breathe out. You've done a few more of those. Just let your breath take its natural course, but keep your attention right there in your lower abdomen, in your hara. And you can watch your breath from there. It's a good vantage point. That's it. Now that you've formed the physical posture, it can be useful to think about the mental posture. Just like the physical posture is both upright and relaxed, the mental posture has the same flavor. It's present and open, ready for anything, willing to turn toward the experience moment by moment, and not so concerned with anything else. There will be thinking, there will be not thinking. There will be sensations and perceptions. There'll be entanglement and disentanglement, all of that. Just let it be itself. And when the opportunity arises, turn toward it and be curious. Be engaged. That's all. That's what they call non-thinking. it's worth asking what we're doing here, right? In the 13th century instructions for Zazen, the founder of Soto Zen in Japan, this guy Dogen, said something like, we're studying the self. That's, or it's usually translated as studying the self anyway. That's okay, but it means study in a very specific way, and he means self in a very specific way, right? Or actually, maybe in a very general way. Studying doesn't mean categorizing, analyzing, and all the rest of that sort of thing. It just means becoming deeply and intimately aware of and familiar with the activity of the self. As continuously and wholeheartedly as possible. And by self, he really means the whole world. The mutual arising of this body, this mind, and the world at large is all the self. If you go into it with that in mind, you start to see how it works. And you start to see both the landscape and also the broader picture of what it is, right, that you're studying. And for that to start registering, all you have to do is kind of get out of the way. Well, let's stretch out a little bit, do some seated stretches. So maybe just keep your lower body still and your chest and shoulders still, and just turn your head to the left. Gently, don't press it too hard. Keep your neck upright. And then turn it to the right. Let your shoulders relax. And then back to the middle. Bring your left, keep your right leg down. Maybe bring your left leg up if you're sitting on a mat, and maybe just place your right palm on your left knee if you're sitting in a chair. So you tuck your arm on the left side of your right arm on the left side of your left leg, and then press and twist all the way around. It can help if you reach your left hand around behind your back. Try and keep your back as straight as possible while doing this, but it's okay if it flexes a little. And breathe deeply. Let the breath deepen the stretch as you breathe. And then press your left leg back down. Bring your right leg up, and the same thing in the other direction. Tuck your left arm around the side of your right leg. Oh, ouch, this isn't working. There we go. And twist and stretch and breathe deeply. All right, come back to the middle. I guess one more thing. Let's rock to the right. You can put your arm down to support you, but just feel a stretch coming up the left-hand side of your body. Reach out with your head. And then the other side. You can put your left arm down if you want. Bend to the left. Feel the stretch all the way down your right side. Relax your shoulder and your right shoulder and arm. And reach out with your head. So it's as though your right hip is reaching out all the way from the hip all the way to the top of your head. And again, breathe deeply. All right, that's good. So, first of all, does anybody have any questions about any of that, or really anything about the practice, the posture, your particular sitting and body? the breath, any of the other stuff that I said, what's Zen all about anyway, any of that stuff. Any questions about any of that?
How about how you hold your hands?
Mm-hmm.
Can you repeat?
Sure, absolutely. So you put your left palm on top of your right palm, and then you roll your thumbs around so you're making a big circle, which it looks like you're doing. That's great. Okay. So you place that kind of against your lower abdomen so that the little fingers of both hands are against your lower abdomen below your navel, and your thumb tips are kind of near your navel, right? And the contact between your hands and your body is very light, and the contact between your hands is very light too, right? So you're just holding this there, and there's a sweet spot in it where you can play with the height a little bit. There's a place where it can feel like you have this sort of continuous circle with a circle on the inside as well, and there's almost no effort required to hold it there. And sometimes when you find that sweet spot, you get this experience where the space in between your hands, the space in here, kind of warms up and feels kind of lively and warm. So play with that a little bit, and then the idea behind it really is that. Are you familiar with the whole thing about the hara or the dantian or any of that? So there's this place kind of in the middle of your body, below your navel, which is the bottom of your breathing apparatus, basically, right? And one of the reasons for this mudra is that it kind of emphasizes and brings your attention here. And like I was saying while we were sitting, in Zazen, in Zen meditation, most of the focus is on the hara, right? It's on it. You kind of breathe from there. When you do that, that breath that I was talking about, it's sort of it's a subtle variant on sort of yogic breathing, right? You sort of lock the two bottom yogic locks. I forget what they're, Uddiyana Bandha and Mula Bandha or something like that. You sort of firm them up a little bit, and you breathe out, and then you release the tension and you breathe in. But your awareness and the emphasis of the posture is sort of down here, right? And so this helps focus that, basically. And it's called the cosmic mudra. So the cosmic mudra. Yeah, exactly. There are other mudras, like if you're sitting in seiza like you, maybe we've talked about this before, but there's one that's more of a martial arts hand posture, but you put your left thumb inside your your right thumb inside your left palm. You roll your left thumb over it, close your hand there, and then sit your hands like this, right? And the reason why that's good, particularly for sitting seiza, yeah, that looks good. The reason why that's good for sitting seiza is that it holds your hands a little higher, so they're not like they're resting above your lap, basically. So and the guy that I learned this from was this guy named Bill Zemsky, who he used to be, he probably still is, but he used to run a little zendo in San Francisco, and he is a kendo master. So he does Japanese sword form, basically. And he came and gave a 2-week workshop on breathing and all the rest of that sort of thing at San Francisco Zen Center. And he talked about this mudra, and he says that, if you were guard in the shogunal palace in the 13th century in Japan. You would sit in seiza all day long on some corridor somewhere, and you'd have your hands like this, but also tucked into your hands along with it, there'd be some sort of weapon. And so he said, just imagine yourself doing that, right? So anyway, but it works. That hand posture works pretty well for seiza. The other thing about Bill Zemsky is that a number of years later, after this workshop, which I really appreciated, actually, I went back to look for him online, and I couldn't find him, and I couldn't find him, and I couldn't find him. It seemed like his connection with the Zen world had completely dissolved, and I didn't know enough about the Bay Area martial arts world to know if he was still connected with that. But I finally discovered what he was doing, and he was a professional tango dancer now. So there you go. So thanks for the question. Anything else or no?
Yeah.
Okay. So they say that Xianglin once asked, this is case 17 of the Blue Cliff record, once asked him, was asked by a monk, the monk says, so what's the meaning of the patriarch, the coming from the West, and I'll tell the whole story and then I'll explain it a bit. But he says, what's the meaning of the patriarchs coming from the West to China, right? And Xianglin says, well, he says something, a four-syllable phrase in Chinese, in literary Chinese, that is usually translated as, well, the complicated translation. And if you feed this into Google Translate, it actually says this. It says, sitting for a long time makes you tired, which is kind of great, right? So before I go on too much further into that, I'll explain a little bit about the whole, what's the meaning of the patriarchs coming from the West. There's Buddhism started in northern India, in what's now northern India, or actually Nepal, what's now Nepal. And over time, it kind of spread out. It spread south into Southeast Asia, and it spread north into Central Asia. And there was a long phase where there was a lot of Buddhism in sort of Central Asia, up through what's now Pakistan and up into Xinjiang and all this, that whole area, right? And then it spread to China. After, I don't know, maybe 800 years, it was getting 700 years, something like that. It was getting firmly established in China, and the usual route for the usual way that initially Buddhism was brought to China was guys usually would go, not always guys, but often would go to India or Sri Lanka or Southeast Asia, and they would bring back Buddhist texts, and then they and a bunch of other people would get together and they would translate them and comment on them and all the rest of that sort of thing. So that was kind of the importing Buddhism industry, and they imported a lot of documents, and they made catalogs and libraries of them and so on and so forth. And it became a kind of, literary thing and obsession and so on in a country that the culture of which was highly literary, right? And um, and so it was a natural thing. People just picked it up. They're like, oh wow, look at this text, and they'd write, like I said, commentaries or other things like that. And over time, while this was happening, Buddhism was also changing a lot, right? And much later, with the establishment of the Zen school, the main axioms or not precepts exactly, but some foundational principles of the Zen school is that studying documents is fine, but all the real stuff happens in relationships between people, basically, and between people and things, and maybe between people and animals. There's a number of koans that involve animals, and there's also a bunch of koans that involve things like rocks and pebbles and sticks and so on and so forth, right? So and that's the first axiom or principle. And the second principle is that you bring forth the Dharma by pointing at the mind, right? And Zen kind of needed and in the process of inventing the Zen school, this was, by this time it was the late Tang Dynasty or the early Song Dynasty. The scholars that were doing it had to cook up a kind of lineage of Zen going all the way back to the historical Buddha, or the supposedly historical Buddha, and following a line. The idea was that the teachings were passed on to this person, and then to this person, and then to this person, and to this person. And pretty much every day in Zen monasteries all over the world, they chant the names of everybody in that lineage from the beginning to the end, to the present day teachers in the monastery where they're sitting, right? Or sometimes they chant shorter snippets of it. But when you actually go to get the sort of this level of priest ordination that's called Dharma transmission, which is why I have a brown colored one of these, or sort of weird colored one of these, that you chant it multiple times a day. Right? You spend hour upon hour chanting this lineage, and then doing it again, and then doing it again. It's a lot, right? And so it was really important, right? And it was acknowledged that Buddhism arose in Nepal and spread around, but there had to be somebody that brought it from India, or actually he kind of lived in Pakistan, or what's now Pakistan, to China. And it was this guy who's a kind of mythical figure, really, named Bodhidharma, right? So whenever anybody says, what does it mean for when the, what is it when that the patriarch came from the West for? It's that guy, right? And people know very little about him, and it's not even totally clear that he was a real person, right? Some people think he was, some people think he wasn't. I'm reading a book right now where the author is pretty convinced that he was, but I've read a number of books where everybody was like, not really, right? He's sort of some sort of mythological character that has some stories about him that happened to real people, but it's not totally clear that there was ever anybody named Bodhidharma, right? So this guy supposedly brought the particular flavor that became the Zen school to China, right? And when somebody says, what does it mean that he came from the West, right? What they're asking about is they're asking about the original importance and function of Zen Buddhism. That's kind of the main, that's kind of the crux of the question, something like that, right? And so, and the answers almost always have to do with sitting zazen. So there is a sort of cohort of people that think that if you read the literature carefully, there's some people who say that if you read between the lines, you'll realize that actually the Zen school in China wasn't really all that involved with seated meditation, right? But pretty much every single case about every single story about Bodhidharma and the question of what does it mean that he came from the West, the answer is he brought seated meditation practice, right? So there's another story, famous story, where this monk asked a bunch of teachers, what does it mean that when the patriarch came from the West? And one guy says, hand me that zafu over there. And so the guy picks up the zafu and he gives it to the teacher, and the teacher hits him with it, right? They're like, duh, right? And then he asked somebody else, and he asked the same question, and the guy says, hand me that sitting brace. The sitting brace is a thing that they use especially in India. If you travel in India, you can see people meditating with it. It's essentially a T-shaped brace that fits under your chin, and you can plant it here, put your hands on it, and rest your chin in it, and it enables you to sit upright for a really long time, and maybe even fall asleep a little bit and wake up in a meditation posture. And so he says, hand me that sitting brace. And so the guy hands him the sitting brace, and the guy whacks him with it, right? And each time he says, you can hit me if you like, but actually there's no significance of Bodhidharma coming from the West, right? But in this case, the guy says, sit long, get tired, right? And that's been my understanding of this saying, right, for years now, because that's the received translation of the sort of primary translation that everybody uses of this piece of Zen literature that was written in the Song Dynasty, says that, and it's by this very definitive and kind of gifted translator who used to live here in the Bay Area, actually, and then I forget exactly where he went. He just died about 2 years ago. Really, really kind of prolific, gifted translator. And I think one of the reasons why people say that is that one of the parts of the story of Bodhidharma's life is that when he comes to China, he does some stuff, and then he gets invited to visit the emperor, right? And he has this exchange with the emperor that is very kind of weird and elliptical, and he's clearly kind of grumpy and so on and so forth. And then he storms off, and he never goes back to see the emperor ever again, right? And instead, he goes to the next kingdom north, which at the time was called Wei. And in the mountains in Wei, there was this famous monastery, well, now famous monastery, which is called, nowadays it's called Shaolin, right? It's famous nowadays because it's the sort of home of Chinese Kung Fu or something like that, right? And there's a lot of Hong Kong Kung Fu movies that have stuff about Shaolin in them. Um, but supposedly he went there, and he found a cave on the property at Shaolin, and he walked into the cave and he sat and stared at a wall for 9 years, and he probably slept a bit, but and ate some, but apparently he had really a lot of trouble with getting sleepy, and at one point, the myth says he ripped his eyebrows off so that they wouldn't close on him and threw them on the ground. And so all the pictures of Bodhidharma, I don't think there are any pictures of Bodhidharma kicking around in here, but even, like in Japan, they make these little tiny figurines that are weighted at the bottom, and they're the kind of thing where if you punch them, they fall over and then they come back upright, right? They make them little and big and so on and so forth. And in all of those representations, and also all the art there's a lot of Chinese and Japanese art that has paintings of Bodhidharma. He always has these big round staring eyes, right? And the other part of the story is that when he threw his eyebrows down, tea plants sprouted where they landed. And so, so the message is, if you're sleepy when you're sitting, drink tea. Okay. But anyway, so that's a sort of, kind of common and important story about Bodhidharma. And so maybe the idea that this phrase means, sit long, get tired, is related to that, right? But recently I spent a bunch of time poking around in it and actually looked up the meaning in literary Chinese of the characters in this phrase. And they don't necessarily say sit long, get tired at all. They say sit long, and then the next the next couple of characters mean something way more like get it done, or do the work, or even one of them, it just says it could be a compound that just means like okay, right? So basically if you look at it that way, it's like sit for a long time and get it done, right? Do the work of sitting, right? Do the work of practice. That's the meaning of Bodhidharmas coming from the West. Here's this practice. Do it for a long time. Get it done, right? Which I found fascinating, actually, and kind of more encouraging than sit long, get tired. Although you really do get tired if you sit a lot. You can't help yourself, and sometimes your eyes close and you fall into a dream state while sitting up, and so on. So, but anyway, so what was I going to say? I guess then the question is, so I was sort of hinting around about this while we were sitting, right? But the question is, what is it you're actually getting done, right? There's a number of ways to look at that, and one of the main ones is, even though Bodhidharma, or the meaning of Bodhidharmas coming from the West is sit long and do the work, right? It's almost always a bad idea to be, spiritually ambitious with your sitting, to be judging it, to be, thinking either, oh, I'm doing really good, or I'm not doing so good, or other things like that, right? Because all of that all of that falls into this mode that in the Zen literature they think of as kind of the secondary mode. It's the mode of measurement, categorization, telling the story of the self, engaging our planning and scheming capacity to try and improve your practice and so on and so forth, right? If all of that stuff is not super helpful, right? So that's not the work, right? The work is something more like what I was talking about earlier, right? Like you bring a particular mind to the experience of the moment when you're aware. You bring a particular mind to the experience of the moment that's self-empathic and curious about what's going on, and that is willing to take in and turn towards pretty much anything that's happening, right? The bird singing in the bush, the twinge in my left knee, the pounding of the air conditioning system, and so on, right? All of that, to just be in the middle of it and turn towards it, right? Whatever perception arises, just let it arise. When a thought arises, let it arise. When the thought takes your attention away, you don't really have a whole lot of choice about that. But when you return, be present with whatever you're thinking too, right? All of that. And then the second part is to recognize that this awareness extends to both the outside, what people call the outside. So our perception of arising phenomena, right? And the inside, our inner life, the thoughts that come up, the ways we explain those perceptions, all the rest of that sort of stuff. It takes in everything, and it's equally important to be present in that way with everything, right? And then when you land in a moment with those minds with that, I guess, that frame of mind, right? What suggests itself is what you do next. And the good thing about sitting is what suggests itself for the most part is doing more sitting, right? Although, for example, when we're present, one way to think about this is as a kind of surfing, right? You're sitting on your board. A wave of thought or of perception or thought arises. You catch it. You're connected to it and absorbed with it, either briefly or, for some thoughts, maybe a little bit less briefly, and then it lets you go, right? And you do it again, right? The only difference between this kind of surfing and the kind of surfing you do with a wave is that you don't have to make any effort at all to catch the wave. The wave catches you. But that kind of surfing is essentially the work. That's what Dogen meant, who I mentioned earlier when we were sitting, meant when he said, study the self, right? And when you do that, if you do that kind of diligently and wholeheartedly for a little while, if you do that work, a number of things start to happen. One is that you become aware that there's, we're mostly used to thinking of our mind as being our thinking mind, the mind that tells the story of the self, that notices phenomena and explains them, that uses language and internalizes the categories and concepts that come with language, and that engages in this complicated sociality that humans have, right? That's the mind that we're, for a lot of people, that sums up what it is to be a human being, basically, right? And in fact, the Cartesians were like, that's all there is. That's the only proof. The only proof we have that there's anything going on at all is the activity of that thinking mind, right? Once you start to study the self, what you realize is that there's more going on than that, right? We have these other modes of engagement, or these other capacities to be engaged in the world without doing too much thinking, without doing any thinking at all, without being concerned with self or other, without being concerned with concepts or plans or any of the rest of that stuff, right? There's often, not always, but often, that awareness dawns slowly. You start to see that there's this other thing going on, but it takes a while before you realize that, and sort of a number of encounters with it before you realize that actually our thinking mind and our unthinking mind, our thinking mind and our sort of unconstructed mind, are always present, and they're always interacting, right? Then the practice becomes one of working with the relationship between those two modes, basically. And initially, when you start practicing, when you're looking at one of them, you're not looking at the other, and vice versa, right? You're either thinking or not thinking, or you're either tangled up in planning and scheming and grasping an aversion, or that mind is invisible, and you're just present in a way that's kind of disorienting, and for a lot of people, sort of disorienting and ungraspable, right? Over time, you start to see the connection, and once that happens, it becomes possible to have your attention move freely between these modes, right? And maybe even sometimes be in both of them at once, right? And that has a lot of practical value, right? For example, it becomes possible to hold your mind in a sufficiently broad container that more possibilities than your habitual response to, even to very difficult circumstances, suggest themselves, which is lovely, right? So it allows for more flexible, skillful, and comfortable living with your whatever version of the human condition you've got, right? And then the other side of it is that it opens the practitioner to experiences that really go beyond the notion of beneficial or skillful or any of those things, that are just indescribable, right? Because to describe them would be to come up with a bunch of words that don't capture them, basically. And that, the story about that is that people say things like, all those experiences are accidents, but sitting makes you accident prone. Yeah, okay, that's good. That's one way of thinking about it. And then all you have to do is avoid kind of, well, I guess I would say this, like the at all stages of practice that we're talking about here, it's possible to delude yourself by going, I'm doing this, right? Or I'm really winning now, right? So all you have to do is avoid that, and you'll probably be great. Yeah. And in the end, those two modes are familiar and well integrated enough that it just feels like everyday life, and going home and sitting by the fire and making some tea, basically. And all thoughts of being extraordinary or special in any way sort of melt, right? It's just living. So that's doing the work. That's what getting it done means. It's the you're never done with it. It's the work of a lifetime, and you're done with it. You're completely done with it in each moment, right? So, any questions about that? Cool. Well, let's sit a little bit more and see what we can make of that, and then we'll call it a night. What do you think? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. It was great. You're right. It is cold tea season.
I got cold.
Mm.